Welcome to Tomorrow Unveiled. Imagine the energy systems of tomorrow, what's going to power our world, our homes, and the really fast-growing demands of things like artificial intelligence. This week, our dedicated research team has found some, well, truly fascinating developments. They suggest a pretty profound shift is happening in the global energy landscape. Today, we're diving into green code, hot core, this week in energy. And this isn't just like small tweaks, it's potentially a huge paradigm shift towards energy that's high density, reliable, and clean.
Exactly right. For, the past decade or so, the main focus has really been on what we've been calling the green code. That's, rolling out lots of wind and solar, low density, intermittent renewables. But recent events, they're showing that this model is hitting some significant challenges, and that's making way for a new approach, more strategic, the hot core. This approach really prioritizes things like advanced nuclear power, next-gen energy storage, and even fusion, all designed for consistent, dispatchable power, power you can count on when you need it.
Okay, so our mission today is to really unpack these recent breakthroughs, these policy shifts. We want to help you understand what all this means for, say, energy security, grid stability, and the future of industrial growth, too. We'll look at how technology, investment, and policy are all kind of coming together to speed up this transition. So what exactly defines this emerging hot core paradigm, and why now? Why is it gaining so much momentum all of a sudden?
Well, the hot core, fundamentally, it emphasizes energy density, reliability, and that crucial element, dispatchability, being able to turn it on and off. It's really about providing constant on-demand power. And the shift, it's being pushed hard by new, really high-value market demands. Think about the massive electricity needs of AI data centers. They need continuous, stable power, unlike anything we've really seen before at this scale. The research team that compiled this info, they highlight that these new demands are really exposing the limits of just relying on intermittent sources like wind and solar. AI's need for power, it's just enormous, and it's constant. It's reshaping energy investment, forcing this pivot towards always-on solutions. Stability is becoming premium.
So it sounds like we're moving past just adding clean generation. Now it's about a more sophisticated stage, prioritizing what the grid actually needs.
That's exactly it. Precisely. We're moving beyond just, adding clean electrons wherever we can.
Right.
We're now at a point where the grid's overall health, its resilience, especially for these big industrial users and data centers, is really dictating the technology choices.
Okay, we've sort of established the why behind this hot core idea. Now let's get into the how. What are the actual tangible technological leaps making this future possible? Our team flagged some key moments just this past week. Let's start with advanced nuclear. What's really pushing it forward lately, especially on the regulatory side and industrially?
Yeah, we're seeing incredible acceleration there. Just in the U.S., regulators recently accepted a construction permit application for a specific small modular reactor design, an SMR. These are, the smaller factory-built reactors, designed to be deployed faster, more flexibly. Getting that permit application accepted is a really big step for SMR technology. The site itself is even being talked about as a potential nuclear renaissance headquarters. And furthermore, our research team noted a major federal initiative launched just this week. It's aimed at accelerating advanced reactor development by tackling the lack of domestic fuel supply chain head-on. This looks like a pretty strategic industrial policy, right? Trying to cut reliance on foreign sources for critical nuclear fuels. We also saw a nuclear fuel company break ground on a huge campus in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, nearly $2 billion. They'll produce the advanced fuels needed for many of these next-gen reactor designs. First factory should be running by late 2027, maybe early 2028. The real takeaway, I think, is how fast policy and industry are working together now to de-risk nuclear, moving it from just a long-term hope to something much more near-term for grid stability and industry.
Okay, so the U.S. is clearly making big moves. But is this just happening in the U.S., or are we seeing similar trends globally for SMRs?
Oh, it's absolutely global, definitely. The SMR market is shifting from just concepts on paper to real, concrete strategic agreements. For instance, there's a landmark partnership between the UK and Czechia. They're focusing on jointly developing and exporting SMRs across Europe. Another European country just signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with a UK company. They're exploring advanced lead-cooled fast reactors. These are interesting because they can potentially use recycled nuclear fuel, helping manage spent fuel. And then even smaller scale, the first U.S. microreactor site was just identified, Rock City, Illinois. It's for a tiny 1-megawatt electric micromodular reactor designed for behind-the-meter use. So think providing super reliable 247 power directly to maybe an industrial site. site.
Yeah.
Lets them sidestep grid vulnerabilities. It just shows the flexibility, right? And the widening market potential.
So you mentioned these different scales, from big state partnerships down to microreactors for single customers. What does this sort of split, this bifurcation, tell us about where nuclear is headed?
It shows the SMR market isn't just one thing. It's clearly bifurcating into two really powerful streams. You've got the top-down, state-driven projects focusing on national energy security and decarbonization goals, and then you have these bottom-up, commercially driven models aimed squarely at industrial decarbonization and reliability, two distinct drivers pushing it forward.
Right, interesting. Now, let's shift gears to something that always captures the imagination: fusion energy, the ultimate clean power source, maybe. This past week seemed to show two very, very different stories unfolding there.
Yeah, it really did. On one side, you have ITER, the huge multinational fusion project under construction down in southern France. They announced a pretty significant setback, an 8-year delay that pushes first plasma, that critical moment. They first generate the super hot plasma needed for fusion all the way out to 2033. And the cost projection went up, too, by at least $5 billion. That's definitely shaken some confidence in that kind of large-scale public sector approach.
Okay, a major setback for the big public project. But you said two stories. What's happening in the private sector? Are they hitting similar walls, or is it a different picture?
It's a completely different picture, actually, almost the mirror image. A German fusion company just secured a massive Series A funding, around $130 million. Record-breaking. Largest private fusion investment ever in Europe. They're developing a stellarator design, which is one of the main magnetic confinement approaches using complex external magnets. Their aim: get a demonstration reactor operational by 2031 and hopefully delivering power to the grid sometime in the 2030s. The research data we've seen suggests investors really believe in these more agile, commercially focused approaches now. And we also saw scientific news like a revolutionary new method for designing fusion reactors that's apparently 10 times faster. Plus, a successful 2,300-hour continuous test of a molten salt pump, which is really crucial technology for some advanced fusion concepts.
Wow, so this divergence, it really seems to highlight maybe a fundamental shift in how we might actually achieve fusion power.
I think it does. It feels like the center of gravity for fusion innovation is rapidly moving away from those slower, sometimes politically complex, big public consortiums towards these nimble, milestone-driven private companies. They're cleverly leveraging decades of public research but applying private sector speed and execution. It almost feels like science fiction becoming, well, business planning, happening much faster than we thought.
Okay, fascinating stuff on fusion. But energy isn't just about generation, right? Storage is always the other half of the equation, especially if you want to rely on powerful, but maybe not always on sources, or just manage the grid better. What's happening with high-density energy storage?
Yeah.
Because that's been a bottleneck.
Absolutely critical piece. And yeah, this week brought some major news on high-density batteries. A U.S. startup working with a big global automaker announced they successfully validated an automotive-size solid-state battery cell. Now, solid state is kind of the next big hope beyond current lithium-ion. This cell boasts an energy density of 375 watt-hours per kilogram. Just for perspective, that's nearly double what you get in many common EV batteries today. And get this, it can charge from 15% to 90% in just 18 minutes. They're planning a demonstration fleet for 2026. And other research is pushing even further reports of up to 1,200 wedged kilograms in the lab for a new lithium-air battery design. Still early days for that one, but the potential is huge.
Okay, 375 wedge kilograms, nearly double, charging in 18 minutes. What does this actually enable? What's the practical difference this kind of battery tech makes?
It really changes the whole calculation for electrification. For EVs, it obviously means much longer range, potentially lighter cars because the battery's smaller for the same range, and that super fast charging addresses major consumer concerns. But for the grid, maybe even more importantly, it makes storing large amounts of energy for longer periods much more feasible economically and physically. That's a perfect complement to these hot core generation technologies, right? Provides a powerful buffer, smooths things out, enhances stability. And a really critical point our team noted, these new battery types are often being designed so they can be manufactured using existing lithium-ion battery production lines with minimal changes. That could massively speed up how quickly they get to market, less need to build entirely new factories from scratch.
Okay, so we've got the tech breakthroughs, advanced nuclear, private fusion surging, high-density batteries. We've seen investment follow, especially in the private sector. What about government policy and the regulatory side? How are governments responding to all this?
Actually, before we dive into the policy shifts, just a quick note. If you're finding this deep dive insightful here on YouTube, please do take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Tomorrow Unveiled, and definitely hit that notification bell so you don't miss future updates. And if you happen to be listening on a podcast service, maybe Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a rating and review for Tomorrow Unveiled. It genuinely helps us reach new listeners. Thanks for considering that. Okay, back to policy. How is the U.S. government's approach to clean energy evolving, given these trends?
Well, in the U.S., the policy landscape seems to be undergoing a pretty significant realignment. It's quite dynamic right now. On one hand, you see a really active effort to accelerate nuclear deployment. Recent executive orders are aiming to drastically cut nuclear licensing times, trying to get them down from an average of maybe 7 years to just 18 months for new permits. That's huge if they can do it. And our research team also flagged reports indicating that at least one federal department is deliberately shifting funds, redirecting money away from some wind, solar, and EV programs specifically to support these strategic nuclear priorities.
Right, so that really underscores the shift we talked about earlier, away from the green coat, but focus on intermittent renewables, towards this hot core idea of high-density, reliable power. It seems quite explicit in policy moves. What's the flip side? What about the impact on existing renewables policy?
Well, simultaneously, you have lawmakers discussing potentially deep cuts to the tax credits, the production and investment tax credits that have really boosted wind and solar deployment. There's even a proposal for a new excise tax specifically on wind and solar projects. Now, all this creates policy uncertainty, right? And that uncertainty is having a real tangible impact already. Nearly $8 billion in private investments and 16 large-scale clean energy projects, mostly renewables, were reported as canceled, closed, or downsized just in the first 3 months of 2025. That figure, $8 billion, is apparently more than 3 times the total value of canceled investments over the entire 30 months before that since those incentives were first introduced. So a sharp change.
Wow. Okay. So clear support for nuclear, potential headwinds for renewables.
Yeah.
How are private investors reading these very different signals? Where's the smart money going?
The private investment markets seem to be reacting pretty directly. If you look at the headline venture capital deals just this past week, they were really dominated by hot core technologies, big funding rounds for private fusion companies, for nuclear battery startups. It strongly suggests there's a growing appetite among, sophisticated investors for these high-density energy solutions. They seem to be betting on a future where reliability and maybe strategic industrial strength are the most valued qualities.
Okay, so we've covered the tech, the investment, the policy shifts. Let's zoom out a bit. Beyond the watts and the dollars, what are the broader sustainability implications of this potential hot core transition? How does it stack up?
Yeah, that's crucial. A full spectrum look is needed, so if you start with land use, for instance, our research team's findings consistently show nuclear energy is incredibly land efficient, one of the best. A typical 1 gigawatt nuclear plant might sit on about 1 square mile. To get the same amount of electricity from a wind farm, you could need, up to 360 times more land area. For utility-scale solar, maybe up to 75 times more. It's a huge difference.
That's a stark comparison on land use. What about the environmental footprint, otherwise greenhouse gases, waste?
Okay, so life cycle greenhouse gas emissions for nuclear power are consistently among the lowest of any energy source. Very comparable to wind, actually, and significantly lower than solar panels over their full life cycle, and obviously much lower than fossil fuels. Now, for nuclear fusion, the waste picture is fundamentally different from current fission reactors. Fusion waste is expected to be much lower level radioactivity, and it decays far more quickly. We're talking secure storage likely needed for decades, maybe a century, not the hundreds of thousands of years associated with some fission waste products.
And what about those new batteries we discussed, the solid-state ones? Are they easy to recycle, or do they create new sustainability challenges for building a circular economy?
That's a really important point. The emergence of solid-state batteries does present a new challenge for recycling. Their chemistry is quite different, making them largely incompatible with the recycling processes we have now for standard lithium-ion batteries. But the good news is researchers are actively working on this, focusing on a design for recycling approach right from the start. For example, one promising new method involves inserting thin layers of a special polymer that can be dissolved later. This would allow the battery components to be separated much more easily, enabling recovery of nearly all the valuable materials. So the problem is recognized, and solutions are being developed alongside the batteries themselves.
Good to hear they're thinking about that early. And finally, the social dimension. especially with nuclear? There's obviously a history, historical concerns. How does that factor in?
Yeah, absolutely. Deploying any of these hot core technologies, especially nuclear, really has to address those historical, social, and environmental justice concerns. Can't ignore them. While the industry is trying to establish principles for environmental justice, the real challenge lies in execution. Things like ensuring robust, genuinely early community engagement when deciding where to build these facilities, and making sure the economic benefits from new projects are shared equitably within those communities. These are critical, ongoing challenges. And, the lack of a permanent disposal solution for spent nuclear fuel, particularly in the U.S., remains a significant issue of intergenerational justice, though potentially some of these advanced reactor designs that can recycle waste might offer a long-term path towards addressing that. So overall, you see a kind of maturing sustainability discussion, moving beyond just carbon to look at land, waste, justice, the whole picture, and how to maximize the benefits responsibly.
Okay, so putting it all together, the tech, the investment, the policy, the sustainability aspects, looking ahead now, what's the realistic roadmap for actually deploying these hot core technologies commercially? And what are the biggest hurdles still standing in the way?
Right, timelines and challenges. Based on the information our research team compiled, here's a clearer picture emerging on commercialization. First, solid-state batteries. We expect initial use in niche, high-performance EVs almost immediately, like in the next year or two. Broader commercial applications probably between 2026 and 2028. Then, widespread mass market use really kicking in the early 2030s. Second, SMRs and microreactors. A first wave of commercial units seems on track to come online in the late 2020s and early 2030s. Then a much broader deployment wave is expected through the mid to late 2030s as manufacturing scales up. And third, private fusion. This is the most ambitious, obviously. The leading private companies are targeting demonstration plants that achieve net energy gain in the early 2030s. If they hit those milestones, the very first commercial electricity from fusion could potentially hit the grid in the mid to late 2030s. Still speculative, but that's the target.
Those timelines, especially for SMRs and solid-state batteries, feel surprisingly close. Fusion's still further out, but maybe not infinitely far anymore. So what are the main things that could still derail this? What are the key hurdles to get over for widespread deployment?
I'd say there are three primary challenges that come up repeatedly in the research. One, regulatory modernization. Agencies need to develop efficient but still safe frameworks for whole new classes of technology, especially advanced reactors and fusion. That takes time and expertise. Two, supply chain bottlenecks. Building all this requires massive capital investment, specialized components, and critically, a highly skilled workforce. Ramping that up globally is a huge task. And three, public acceptance and social license. This is crucial. Earning public trust through really transparent communication and genuine community engagement is essential, especially around sensitive issues like long-term waste management for nuclear. You can't just impose these technologies.
It really sounds like these hot core technologies aren't just about replacing old power plants one for one. It seems they're positioned as enablers for a more advanced, more resilient, and ultimately maybe a fully decarbonized global economy. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think that's precisely it. And what's often missed is their unique combination of features. High energy density, that 24/7 reliability, and also the high temperature heat they can produce that makes them uniquely suited to power the really demanding industries of the future. Think massive data centers, advanced manufacturing, maybe large-scale production of clean hydrogen or synthetic fuels. Things current renewables struggle with, the capital, the industrial momentum, the policy will. It really seems to be shifting clearly in their favor now.
What an incredible week, and what an insightful deep dive into this accelerating energy revolution. From the rapid de-risking of nuclear deployment, those thrilling advances in private fusion, to the really game-changing potential of solid-state batteries, the whole narrative of our energy future feels like it's evolving very, very quickly. We've seen how that strategic capital, the industrial momentum, and government policy are increasingly favoring these high-density, reliable solutions.
Yeah, this convergence really signals we're moving into a more sophisticated phase of the energy transition, doesn't it? It's not just about being clean anymore. It's also about being resilient, being secure, and ideally being abundant, really addressing the complex, demanding needs of our modern, high-tech world.
So the final thought may be for you, our listener. What does an energy system truly built on abundance and density actually mean? What does it mean for everything from global geopolitics down to the everyday technologies we rely on in our homes? Something to think about. We always love hearing your thoughts. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast app, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about this whole green code versus hot core idea and the future of energy as you see it. Thank you so much for joining us on Tomorrow Unveiled, where we explore the frontiers of knowledge shaping our world. We'll be back next time with another exploration into your most pressing questions about the future.